Is it loud on my end at all?
Sound good.
Okay.
Okay, well, we're finally live, or we were
Yay.
10 seconds ago. Anyway, we're excited to have on with us Erica from Southern Fried True Crime and Simone from Murderous Minors.
Hey guys.
I don't know if
Um,
Simone's below me or not, but you look below me on my screen down.
Hey Justin.
How you guys doing?
Doing great. How about everyone else?
Good. I'm good.
You go
Trying
ahead and
to
start,
stay
Simone. Can you
alive.
tell us a bit about your show for anyone who doesn't know?
Yeah.
Hey guys, it's War Baby from Murderous Minors Killer Kids podcast. And I record here out of Mesa, Arizona. I'm right out of Phoenix. So it's it's probably about 108 right now at 6 o'clock at night. So, but my show, basically, I just cover cases where children have killed. And um, I've covered a couple where, you're not sure, but basically I just like to cover the cases where minors, I've started going a little bit into college age cases because expanding brain science and all that, I feel like creeping into the early 20s is safe territory for me. And we will start to hear a little bit more stories about that. But kids is basically what I cover. When I do interviews, I like to interview victims' parents and things like that. That's who I usually speak to. I don't write to killers or, correspond with murderers in prison or anything like that. So, I mean, I'm not going to say I haven't, but I don't do that purposely for this show. That's not really what I'm getting at. But I do enjoy hearing from parents, especially parents of victims, because they have, just a kind of strength that you don't see in people who haven't experienced things like this. Erica knows, she speaks to victims' families as well. So, and you guys, I mean, we all do that, but I think that's really important. So, yeah, that's what I do.
And what got you focused on kids?
When I was pregnant with my oldest child who just turned 21 last week, Columbine happened. And before I got married and started having kids of my own, I never even really thought about kids that much. It wasn't something that was even on my horizon. But once you start on that path of becoming a parent, you see the whole world in a whole different way. And when Columbine occurred, I was like, wow, this is what, I'm getting myself into. This is what we have to look forward to in our future as all our kids grow up. It's only getting worse, not better. So after I started listening to true crime, there were certain kinds of stories I was looking for that I wasn't really able to find. So with the help of a whole bunch of people that I reached out to, because, the creator community is fantastic when it comes to podcasters, especially with help and encouragement and support. And I got so much of that when I wanted to start doing this. And I got a lot of encouragement, mostly because a lot of shows don't like to cover kids. When there's kids involved, it's a really touchy subject for them. But I figured I'd just go all in. If you're going to do it, you might as well do it every week.
Well said. Erica?
Well, I am Erica Kelly. My show is called Southern Fried True Crime, and the title kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah.
I only cover Southern cases, and I kind of look at the good old boy system. I cover a lot of racism and elitism, and I'm really passionate about domestic violence and rape culture and wrongful convictions. The South can be a whole different ballpark when it comes to the judicial system and the way all of that works. And like Simone said, I'm really, really passionate about victims and their families and how it's affected them. And I try to be more focused on that, even though I can definitely get heated and judgmental. I definitely give my opinion. That's not always something people are into, but I think it's my thing. I don't, you can read Wikipedia if you don't want an opinion. I like to have a viewpoint, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And it's very Southern.
And was there a case that you covered where your opinion generated a lot of feedback?
Yeah, it's the one we actually talked about, Geoffrey McDonald, for sure. Yeah, I've gotten blowback on a few cases, especially when it was like I don't always work with families. I try to, but those cases tend to take months to build when you're diving into something like that. And I mean, I did one time and was threatened anonymously, and it was crazy. So I'm kind of careful and I space those out. more or less, I consider myself a storyteller. I like a narrative format. And for that reason, I don't do a lot of cold cases or disappearances. I don't think it's my forte. I more or less want to get to the why, discuss why it happened and how it ended this way and how this person got a sentence or didn't get a sentence, if that makes sense.
We like the why.
Yeah.
Yeah, we hear
The
you on
why
that.
is the most important part.
Yes.
But one thing I remember talking to you about, though, Erica, is there was a time where you weren't sure about sharing your opinion, probably because of some blowback.
Oh, yeah.
But didn't you say that you found now that really people are catching on to your show because of that? They want to hear your opinion.
Yeah. For what people used to kind of crap on me about in the beginning is what they love about now. And I think I'm just one of those people, you're either going to love me or hate me. It's not usually a medium. I rarely get like a 2 or 3 star review. It's either a 1 star, they hate me, I'm opinionated, I'm a liberal, I'm this, that, or I'm a 5 star and they love me. They love that I'm opinionated and say what I think. And I like my 5 star people. There's more of them than the other ones. And I get more feedback from people privately on email that tells me I'm doing the right thing. I hear from 911 operators, therapists, doctors, police officers, district attorneys. Like, I'm always shocked because, I don't have a law degree. I've never worked in any of those fields. And the fact that they respect what I'm doing and reach out means a great deal to me.
I think every review on the internet's either 1 star or 5 stars. There's never a 3 star where you're like, they're just okay.
I got a few in the beginning. Well, it's always been like, oh, your audio is an issue. And I'm like, no shit. Sorry.
You can't cuss. You can't cuss, damn it.
1 star review for you.
My point, like, your audio is not great in the beginning if you're indie. I wasn't making any money. Like, you upgrade equipment as you go. And so typically some of my reviews, I feel like they're going back to older episodes and I'm like, not fair.
I know, it's like, please don't start at number 1. Start at the most recent one and go back. It makes the most sense that way.
I didn't have an editor until like episode 55. So,
What you said about getting feedback from the community and the community that works in these kinds of cases, it's because we get to say things that they want to say, but they can't. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And so when people agree with you because it's logical and makes sense, they do have a tendency to reach out, which is great. And I appreciate every single listener that ever approaches me one-on-one to tell me something, not in a review form, but I get even, you get messages of hate as well. I hate that you did this. I hate that you did that. And it's just, thanks for giving me a shot. You know what I mean? Not everyone's going to like you. And if you're going to start doing this, that's really something that you have to come to terms with. I do this because I like it and I like to write. I don't do it because I want people to like me or because I want to make money.
You can't. You really can't. Because if it's your passion, then you do it. And anytime a new podcaster comes to us and says, hey, I want to start a podcast and how do I become rich and successful? And I'm like, no, do it because you want to do it and you love it. That's it.
Exactly.
Well, Erica, one of the things I want to talk to you about, because we covered this case and you covered it. Actually, we'll probably talk about 2 cases, but the Eastburn family murders, as well as the Geoffrey McDonald case. These are cases that involve, they're terrible. Whole families get wiped out. And at the end, there's one man on trial. And in both of these cases, both Timothy Hennis and Geoffrey McDonald have supporters who believe they're not the culprits. So
hardcore too.
They're very hardcore. Just setting up one of them, I know that the Eastburn case involved Catherine, her daughters Kara and Aaron. They were both 5 and 3. Catherine was 31 at the time. This happened in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And obviously the husband, Gary Eastburn, they vetted him. They checked him out. They checked to see where he was, and they were able to show that he was not involved in this crime. So we can set aside, at least, in this case, the husband.
Right.
Timothy Hennis became a suspect because the family was getting ready to move to England, and they didn't think that it'd be a good idea to send the dog to England. So they thought they should sell it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I find that a little weird because I know people love their dogs.
I
But
think it was the timing of quarantine was what I remember. It was like a weeks at the time, and they just
yes,
want to put the dog through it. The dog was still young enough, I think. But yeah, it would be weird for me, but I kind of understand it with a young family.
but it's still tough because they have to sell this dog. So they put an ad, what is it, in the classifieds for
Yeah,
Dixie.
yeah.
And this tall blonde man answers the ad apparently, and he ends up buying the dog. I think it's on, let me get my date right here, May 7th. I think it was May 7th. It was just days before the terrible events that occurred in that home that took the lives of this mother and her two kids. And for anyone who's forgotten, there was a 22-month-old in the house, Jana, who was unharmed.
Yeah.
She was left alone.
But she was to the point, had she just a few hours more, she could have died from dehydration, and she'd been left there that long. It's super sad. That was hard. It's not hard. I mean, just as hard as everything else the other girls went through, but yeah, that was heartbreaking.
Yeah, the thing I remember about it is Gary said that moving on after a case like this is so difficult because literally his whole life was just shredded. But having Jana, his remaining daughter still alive, he said it was just unbelievable the amount of help that she's given him just by being there.
Yeah.
And of course, she never really knew her sisters or her mother. So they have this whole relationship, and there's this thing that bonds them. And of course, it's the murders.
Right. Did you ever, I actually read an opposing book, somebody that believed in his innocence. I kind of like getting both viewpoints. And they actually sent Jana to a hypnotist and a child therapist. And she actually remembered some pretty disturbing things. Like I would have to find it in my script to know exactly what it was, but it was basically her sister trying to hush her. Like they knew something bad was happening to mommy, basically. And her sister was trying to hush her, and there was a bad man in the house. Like, oh my God, I get broken up just thinking about it. But to think that I mean, especially after what was the case in California with, the child therapist kind of used puppets and placed images in their minds. Golly.
Like McMartin preschool.
Martin, that's it. Yeah. People kind of took it that way, that's what the child therapist did. And they didn't wind up using it in trial, but I thought it was really interesting because she was really specific in what she said. So unless they literally told her what to say, it was, pretty horrific.
And so young, it's amazing that she could even remember anything, even to recall it from her subconscious memory or something like that, So why do people think this guy's innocent?
Well,
what is it about?
The first trial went really well. It went really well, except the prosecutor got cocky, overdid it. Like they had him. They had a great eyewitness. They had good evidence on everything. They had the dog and a lot of circumstantial stuff. And of course, they didn't have DNA then. They did have blood typing, but they didn't have DNA. But what happened was at the end of the trial, he went overboard with photos and autopsy photos, which that comes up a lot. I see in appeals that was too much. And, they'd made motions at the trial to try and keep it out. And I don't think you can keep that out. That's not right. The jury has to see it.
Right.
But what they did was basically put up like a home movie montage and repeatedly showed some of the same images over and over. So it did get overturned on appeal. His second trial had, the original prosecutors had moved on. These people were not as dedicated. The main eyewitness was, it was a young Black man. And in that time he'd gotten into some trouble. And it's easy to say that the police and the other people kind of leaned on him one way or the other, like whatever, he was going to say. And he started getting really aggravated and confused. And he didn't make as good a witness in the second trial.
And wasn't there a jogger that was like a tall blonde guy that looked just like
that's what they say. I don't really believe the jogger theory. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the guy was real, but whether or not he actually was jogging that night at that time.
You're right. You're right. I forgot there was a guy that lived in the neighborhood that did it. Yeah. But no, I don't believe in the jogger theory at all. But yeah, they got him the third time, but
Cool.
and you have to admit the way they got him the third time, it's ethically edgy because like he was retired and the army, basically put him back on active duty just to charge him because they'd failed in, civilian court. And they're like, okay, we'll look at him this way. Well, they had the DNA, and I am morally fine with what they did, but looking at it from a scholarly standpoint, it's pretty messed up that he was retired and they put him back on active duty to charge him. And a lot of people have issues with this trial because of that.
There was a lot of arguments about double jeopardy, but
Yes.
it's civilian to military, so
Yeah.
it's technically not double jeopardy. But when the civilian courts didn't come through, the military courts came in and said, "No, screw that. We're gonna take care of your ass." Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is like in the McDonald case, it was the other way around.
Yeah.
The military court fucking. I am such a cusser, y'all.
The military court fucked up, so the civilian court came in. Yeah.
Exactly. So like it took a long time to bring him to justice, and it was the exact opposite scenario, basically.
Yeah. You can cuss all you want, Erica. It's okay.
So we do have this question of Hennis, they found his DNA, they were able to match it. And there are still people out there, like the author of the book that supported his case of innocence. They still maintain that I don't care what they have. It just doesn't make sense. So I won't accept it.
Well, I think it was like you and I were talking later, like he eventually was like, well, we had consensual sex. If that was true, why didn't you say it in the first two trials?
Yeah.
The blood evidence was there. They just didn't really know about DNA. And if I can't remember the exact blood typing to be certain, but I think some of his matched the victims. So it would have been harder to understand what was what. And, most people nowadays consider hair evidence to be junk evidence. Like, they don't like hair and fiber. They want DNA. Back then, it was much more respected. And it was very well respected in the McDonald case.
Well, when it comes to Hennis, it just seems like, I think it's human nature. We don't want to be wrong. And we don't want the person we believe to be this good person to not be that person. So what's more important here?
He's also an anomaly in that, like, okay, he's not a family annihilator like Geoffrey McDonald. He did this one time. Typically, somebody that commits this kind of violent crime, they don't just stop. But I think he was smart enough to know that he got lucky, that he got away with it, in the second trial. And so he kept his nose clean. He raised his family. He did his time in the military and he was done. And people think that alone makes him look innocent, which I just think it makes him look smart.
They're called crimes of opportunity. And we've seen this, I'm sure you've been reading about, and Simone, I'm sure you've heard too, but they've been doing familial DNA matches on unsolved crimes. And a lot of these guys are coming up as people who, as far as they know, killed one person one time. I mean, what are the odds? We all think, oh, they're going to have this bloodlust, they're going to do it again. But I don't think it's true. I think crimes of opportunity.
That's definitely true. This kind of specific crime, though, the rape and murder of a woman and her two little children, it was a crime of opportunity. I don't know. It seems like someone like that seems to be like a psychopath, a monster. You don't think that kind of person can stop.
You would expect a pattern, really, right?
Yeah.
But he had no criminal record, right?
I think he had like some minor, I forget exactly what it was. It was nothing. Do you remember what it was, Aaron? I'm trying to think if I can remember it in my script.
It wasn't anything that you would think this guy's capable of murder.
It was misdemeanor. Whatever it was nothing. Maybe
it was bad checks.
Bad checks. Yeah.
He wrote bad checks. That's not even, because normally we have people who are thieves, who do breaking and entering. Those people, we can understand how they commit murders. Sometimes
the progression seems logical.
Right. But bad checks, I mean, anybody could do that. People get desperate.
Well, most people think that he went and met her. She was a pretty woman and, got the dog and then made his plan. So that's what makes it even more kind of diabolical. It wasn't necessarily a crime of opportunity. He went back. He had gotten the dog, taken the dog home, and then he went back, and she probably opened the door to him just to say, oh, hey, okay, you're the guy that took my dog. Is everything going out? Is everything all right? Or otherwise, that might not have happened.
Well, yeah, let me explain the opportunity thing. I definitely think he knew that she was alone. Her husband was away. So he went back. And because she did open the door, that was the opportunity.
Yeah, exactly.
It just sucks that it's, you're familiar with this person. You just sold them a dog. Now you see them at your door. You feel comfortable opening the door.
Mm-hmm.
But was the purchase of the dog perceived to be innocent? Like he literally was just trying to buy a dog and went to buy a dog and saw her?
Yes, absolutely. He and his wife are actually having a little bit of marital trouble. They had a fairly new baby at home. I forget how old their baby was. I want to say it was under a year. And they wanted a family dog, and it was purely innocent. He went and answered an ad, and there's been conjecture of, problems with his marriage. And so he wanted to have sex, but sex is not rape. We know that.
Right.
But that's the way it's been played out. Like, I don't know that I fully, maybe he thought he could sweet talk his way in, and, just because your husband's away, you want to have some fun, and it didn't go his way, then it escalated.
That seems like the going theory anyway.
Yeah.
Now, we also brought up the McDonald case. Could you give us a little summary of that? Because I want to talk about how that case isn't so much just people doubling down on their ideas, but just the mysterious circumstances of that case.
Well, Geoffrey McDonald in February of 1970, and this would have been after the Manson murders in, I believe, August of 1969. He basically, he had been hopped up on amphetamines. He had worked on base as an Army medic, and then was moonlighting at 2 different hospitals. And he was taking a perfectly legal drug. I forget what it's called. At the time, it was widely prescribed. They didn't know the dangers. But he hadn't basically slept in like 36 hours. And a big point of contention in his marriage was his older daughter wet the bed. And what they believe happened is that he got up to go to bed. Kimberly was in the bed. He found the bed wet. A fight broke out. And, it got really ugly between him and Colette. And then he picked up basically like a 2x4 or something from his, there was like a little porch outside their room, I think. And some people think that he hit Kimberly by accident, like a backswing, but she was actually hit in the back of her skull. That seems deliberate, like rage. There's no doubt it was rage when it comes to Colette. Both of her arms were broken, her skull shattered. I mean, the amount of viciousness was just outrageous. Like it sounds like a domestic violence situation that went absolutely insane once his daughter became involved. But the worst part of this entire case is that everything he did was bad enough, but his 2-year-old daughter, Kristen, was in another room and had slept through the whole thing. And he decided to try and make this look like the Manson murders, like a cult had come in and killed his family. He even had a magazine sitting on his living room table. I think it was an Esquire that outlined everything that had happened in the Manson murders. And there was a thumbprint in blood, where he'd gone through there and flicked and looked to see what he was going to do. And that's, I think the most evil thing he did, not that everything he did was evil, but the worst part was he murdered his 2-year-old by stabbing her. She was not clubbed and she was awake and had defensive wounds, but he needed to make it look like this cult horrific stabbing thing. And then he went and he made like one little scalpel mark on his chest that was just enough to just barely nick his lung. Like it was not life-threatening whatsoever. And he kind of staged the scene, and then he actually went and put some stuff over Colette's body and stabbed her more, because he'd really pretty much killed her with the club. He hadn't done any of the stabbing yet until he decided to make it look like Manson murders. So he had already placed some stuff over her chest, and this was a big mistake because it came out in trial that the way the stuff was folded, you could tell there had already been blood on it before the stabbing. So she was, he basically just took every instrument to make it look like that. And then he laid down beside her and called the military police. They come, they pick him up, right away. They want to believe him, but he's acting really strange. But they pretty much suspected him from the beginning. And it was just, I think because of the time, I remember I talked about in my episodes, nowadays we know better. You walk into a crime scene like that, you back out the door. You don't go walking through, And it was a rainy night in February with mud. And yeah, the military police, they tromped all over the scene. You know, they had a man they thought was dying laying on the floor. Of course, he's covered in blood. They didn't know until the hospital that he had no life-threatening injuries. He had like one little bruise on his head. That was it. And then his little nick. And I mean, it went on crazy. He got away with it because of the way they felt that the MPs had mishandled the evidence. And so the Army just pretty much let it go. And then it was actually his father-in-law, who was Colette, that was his wife. It was her stepfather. He never had any children of his own. He adored his stepdaughter and he adored his grandchildren. And he was never happy with it. And he requested, it was called an Article 32 hearing. He wanted, I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. He wanted to read the entire transcript. And it was so sad. He got it on Christmas Eve. He finally got it after fighting for it. And he spent the entire Christmas holiday reading it and then was convinced. And then he harassed everybody he could, up into like state representatives, to look at this case. And it wasn't until 1979, the murders happened in 70, that Geoffrey McDonald went to trial. And by then, he had been showing up on the late night shows and just being such a total dick everywhere that it looked terrible. He did not look like a grieving husband and father. He had a flashy new boat. He moved to California. He had a series of girlfriends. Like, I know everybody grieves differently, but you can't keep claiming your innocence when there's a possibility you could be charged. I just don't think he ever thought he would be charged.
He went on these shows to talk about his family being murdered?
Yeah. He went on the Dick Cavett show because like he had gained a sort of celebrity.
I think I kind of remember seeing a clip of that.
That was actually what really got, Kassab, I forget his first name, the stepfather. That was what really got him suspicious, was watching him on that and watching him laugh and joke. And he was like, how can you laugh and joke about this? This is horrific. And it was upsetting. And that's what made him keep pursuing it. And, you know, the Army was watching it all along and were very upset how things had happened. So they happily turned over every piece of evidence they had. And a big mistake he made was, you know, giving a formal statement. He had to stick to it. And he screwed up in his original statement by saying that it was Kristen who wet the bed. And this case is a total anomaly because there was no DNA, but it was 4 people with 4 different blood types, which is unusual in a family. I think Colette was A, he was B, Kimberly was A, B, and Kristen was O. So even though you didn't have DNA the way you would in a normal crime scene, because of the different blood types, they were able to reimagine, like, you know, figure out exactly where the fight started, who was killed when, because of that. And it was extraordinarily powerful evidence. And fibers were, you know, they're junk evidence now, but at the time, in this case, they were great because he had on blue pajamas. That was well established. And it was blue threads found everywhere, even under his youngest daughter's fingernail. So that sort of evidence was really compelling. And plus, he was the shittiest witness ever. He was hostile. He did not come off as grieving. You know, he mustered up a few tears and they looked fake. You know, I mean, we've heard several things from jurors over the years that said that, but
sounds like a personality disorder.
You know, and I mean, like Joe McGinnis that wrote the Bible on him, basically. And I, you know, to be fair, I read Errol Morris's book, and The Wilderness of Error, and all of that. And, you know, Joe McGinnis thought he was basically a sociopath, possibly a psychopath. And he also was the one that discovered the amphetamines. That didn't come out at trial. It was when he was writing the book and he was just handed the entire box from the Article 32 that had never come out, that he kept wanting them to make sure they knew that he had taken a pill. That's in case it came out in a tox screen, which it never did because back then we didn't really test for that kind of stuff. So he kind of took it and he got into a psychotic rage from amphetamines, and he was a sociopath, which is fair.
It's an unbelievable story. And I know when Justin and I covered it, there were all these stories about a mysterious woman and candles and all of this. And
the woman in the white hat.
Yeah. And where does this stuff come from? I mean, it helped him, I think, not so much at trial, but just with support from average people who were reading about it.
You know how they found her, right? Her neighbor saw that there was a $5,000 reward for information. He never even knew her. They'd never have a conversation. And he acted like he knew her and said that, you know, she often dressed as a witch. He believed she was in a cult. And this is how the defense got a hold of her. And she was very drug-addled. Later in life, she was diagnosed with personality disorders and other issues. And I believe she died of cirrhosis and something else, maybe heart disease by the age of 32. So she was a heavy drug user. And they did that thing of confusing her. It's, you know, we see it all the time in interrogations, back and forth and back and forth. Do you really know where you were that night? Well, no, I'm not sure. And so because she was such an unreliable person, that's how it happened. Well, years later, they found the guy that turned her in. He totally admitted that he just turned her in for the money. And, you know, he tried to lie at first and they made him take a polygraph and he failed. So, you know, it's really shitty that she's part of a big part of the thing that the Geoffrey McDonald apologists say, there's no way. Halina Stokely was there that night. There's never been any proof. And she never would name any other people that would have been with her. And there was no proof of anybody else in that apartment. There would have been
He just said that she was there with this family, with the Manson type family of killers.
I forgot to tell his story. Yeah, he said that he woke up on the couch and that there was a woman, a blonde hair and a floppy hat holding a candle, basically saying, kill the pigs, die.
Oh.
Because he was repeating the kind of stuff that happened in the Manson murders, and that there were 2 or 3 guys, I forget how many, I think he said 3, that were beating him up and stabbing him and doing all this stuff. And then one of the sickest things he did to make it look like the Manson murders, you know, Sharon Tate's blood was used to write pig on the door. He did that on his headboard in his and Colette's bedroom. He is a sick motherfucker. I mean, like, he definitely tried to stage it that way. And I mean, I guess people just really believe it because, you know, the Manson murders changed the culture in our country of the way of, you know, you're safe in your home and what you think can happen. And, you know, the brutality of it was so spread around the news and people knew exactly what happened. And, you know, I think that had a large part of why people are willing to believe he's innocent. And he's extremely charming. He's a sociopath. If you meet him, everyone that's ever met him has said he's all eye contact and handshakes and warm, you know, like
charismatic personality.
Exactly. Yeah.
I always wonder, you know, when there's these apologists, it's like, do they have an alternative theory as well? If he didn't kill his family, where are the people who actually did kill his family? The lady in the hat?
Yeah. They always say Halina Stokely, that she was there with other people, even though there were never, ever any other suspects named. She never named anybody. They were never able to find anybody. And, you know, that's all they've got, really. And his denials.
And in correlation with the Manson murders, you had the satanic panic. So it just was this perfect storm of somebody else did this. Nobody would have killed the wife and the children, all this stuff. And that's where the reasonable doubt comes in for his apologists, for his followers. And when Aaron and I first covered it, I put a lot of weight on this story of the woman in the white hat. And when she turned out to be a real person, I was like, how the hell? Second time we covered it, I was a lot more dismissive about that story. But yeah.
I'm going to cover some satanic panic next week.
It's good stuff.
I've done a few of that. And I mean, it's amazing how inflamed it can make a person or a jury or what. And I can totally, you know, that was, he was convicted in 79, 80. So that was sliding right into that mindset. So you can see why people believe it. Well, I can't see it.
You cover on your show, you cover kids who kill. Mm-hmm. And so one of the topics that comes up is, and Justin and I have covered such cases, and we always ask, I mean, how do you sentence someone who's so young? Obviously, if they've done it, they need to be punished. But how do we do that? In our society now, there's just this quick response of, well, this 14-year-old did it. They should be sentenced like an adult because of how horrible the crime was.
They're a monster. Throw away the key.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the legislation that we vote in all of our states. You know, however they're going to do it is however we voted in the past, whatever the law is. But that's really starting to change. I mean, it goes through like a couple decades cycle. You know, for a while, they treat children like children. And then we reinstated the death penalty right around the same time as the Geoffrey McDonald case occurred. And then we're executing kids. And then, you know, the early 2000s come, and then we're like, well, we can't execute kids anymore because now we're sending every case to adult court. You know, where's the rehabilitation? So it just one the pendulum just swings from one end to the other. And now we've abolished the death penalty for juveniles. So we're coming back around to juvenile justice reform, the kind that is geared toward getting kids ready to go back out on the street and getting them the kind of help maybe they needed before they perpetrated a crime. Not really sure, because I hear a lot about the laws changing and the sentences changing, but I don't hear a lot about what the juvenile justice system in those particular areas are going to look like now. So we're going to start sending more kids back to juvie, but we've pretty much dismantled our juvenile detention facilities and stuff like that, because most kids have been going to adult prison for the kind of crimes that we used to send them to juvie for. So,
and what's the answer here, do you think? Because when I read about these cases, you can see where sometimes they have really bad home life. Sometimes it's inexplicable. But how do you point at the parents and say it's your fault when, I mean, how many of us are actually qualified to deal with mental illness or other conditions that need treatment instead of, them being ignored?
Or
Right.
brains not being developed yet.
Right. And I mean, of course I understand and agree with that, but adults' brains are fully developed, and look at the stuff we do. So it just makes it so much more clouded when you're trying to decide what to do with kids. But what it comes down to, I think, is that had we not systematically dismantled our mental health system in this country back in the 70s and early 80s, there'd be a lot more intervention that could be happening before these things happen. And it's like, you can't always blame the parents, because if children have mental illness, most of that is genetic. Sometimes parents are going to be dealing with the same types of things and may not even be equipped in that area to help their kids. But I do see that, there's often signs. Things like this rarely ever happen, and people say, I didn't see this coming. I see way more often than not people who knew the perpetrator, family members, grandparents, best friends, teachers. You see this kind of stuff coming, but we don't have the tools to deal with it. There's no mental health office you send kids to when you feel like they need to talk to someone.
Well,
it's frightening.
Underprivileged. Another big issue, I think, is we don't our insanity plea in this country is just so cut and dry. There's no room for you can have mental health issues, but unless they consider you insane in the moment,
at the time you committed the murder, and who can prove that?
And exactly, and prisons are full of mentally ill people because of this, and it's really hard to prove, and I think that needs an overhaul too.
Absolutely.
And my other thing though is, this is America, and so many Americans feel like the answer is lock them up forever or kill them. Is that changing, do you think? Are these attitudes changing?
I think that the lock them up forever mantra is probably heading on its way out, given the other things going on with law enforcement right now. You can't be an advocate of long prison sentences when you see case after case and, bad confessions and coerced confessions and innocent people going to prison. It's really hard to back it. And I think with the other things going on, hopefully that will continue to go toward being reformed itself, but it's hard because private prisons is just such a money motivator. It's not really tied to anything like societal benefit or anything like that. It's just more about generating income for a state, and for the government.
It always seems like we look at the reforms when it's a death penalty case, but no one gives a shit when it's just, oh, this person might get charged and sentenced to 10 years or a life sentence. And so
or life sentences for minor drug convictions and things like that,
And we should be reforming and looking and reanalyzing how we sentence people regardless of the severity of the crime.
Decriminalizing a lot of things like marijuana, especially when it's being legalized everywhere. That's
right.
Insane.
It's hard to get behind that.
Yeah. It's not legal in my state.
Well,
Because you live in the dirty South.
Yeah, right?
You guys don't get to have anything down there.
We will be the last damn state, I can promise you. I mean,
And-
maybe Alabama might
And-
might be after us, but Tennessee's
And-
bad like that.
I was going to say, and it's always, all politicians, regardless of party, it's always cool to be hard on crime and tough on crime. It's never cool to be soft on crime. That doesn't
Well,
happen.
shit, wasn't Clinton the three strikes you're out president?
Yep.
And, he's a Democrat, so
Yeah.
they always want to act like it's Republicans that are hard on crime. But I mean, Joe Biden's under fire right now for the bill he introduced back in the 80s, and it had some kind of racist language in it.
It did.
But people can change. I'm not going to say anything
Yeah.
further than that. But I think you're right. Every president has to act like they're tough on crime in some way or the other. It just depends on the kind of legislation they back.
Yeah, they say it depends on what time it is too, because there have been certain elections where the country is supposedly leaning left or right. And so candidates need to act like they're pandering a bit to voters who may not consider them unless they say something like that. That's just from
Unfortunately, yeah, and that's just how politics works. I mean, you say what you're going to say and you touch on the issues that voters are polling towards caring about. And I mean, like, prison reform, juvenile justice reform laws. Like, if you asked 100 people, like, do you think a 20-year-old should be tried in juvenile court or sentenced by a juvenile court judge? Like, what do you think people would say? But states are doing that. California and Massachusetts are trying to get 18, 19, and 20-year-olds to be under the umbrella of the juvenile court jurisdiction instead of going to adult court. And I just can't imagine a 20-year-old in juvenile court. But
you think that's a huge problem too, is that differential between, like, okay, at 18 you can vote, you can buy a gun, you can go to war, in most states you can be executed, and there's a big disparity between 18 and 21 in my mind. I have teenagers at home, and I have friends with older teenagers, and the difference in those 3 years is incredible. I still believe that even at 2021, you're not quite there yet, but I have a really hard time with, okay, is it 18 or is it 21? You're willing to send them to war and do all these other things to them, but they can't drink until they're 21. Like, that doesn't make it, if you have
societally, we have one age for things, but when it comes to criminal, court and criminal and laws and things like that, they do it another way. But it's like, so a 20-year-old can go to juvenile court, but in some states a 14 or 15-year-old can get married. It doesn't make any sense, So it's like, if we're going to skew toward, the Supreme Court said that brains stay more juvenile than adult into the 20s, you got to start looking at all kinds of things around this country, like age of consent. I mean, there's just a lot of other things that you need to protect children from, even if it's not something necessarily criminal. But if kids are kids for longer than we thought, we need to protect them a little bit more instead of trying to make them adults faster when it comes to getting them out of our house.
Right.
Protection from marriage, right? Is that what you're saying?
Well, protection from making decisions juvenile brains shouldn't be making, you know what I mean? But
absolutely.
Certain states put, age limits on things and say you can make these decisions at certain times, but also if you commit a crime, then you might be able to stay in juvenile court until you're 20. So it's just kind of confusing about when we're trying to determine people are going to be adults now, And
it's a state to state issue.
Yeah, it really is.
Federal guidelines. And I think that's a huge part of, if you want real reform, there's going to have to be some kind of sweeping federal guideline when it comes to children specifically. I mean, we can't agree on the death penalty for adults, much less anything to do with children. I'm
all for states' rights, but my God,
there's certain things, and this is one of them.
Yeah.
When it comes to our children, no, I don't. Yeah, I'm all for states' rights too, but please.
So we got a question in, but I have a question for Simone before we get to this question. And that is, are there cases that, and I don't know all of the cases you've covered, but are there cases you've covered where the killer was thought to be a child, but didn't end up being a child? Do you cover cases like that?
I mean, I don't generally. I just recently touched on one where I wasn't entirely sure of her guilt, I went into it knowing I didn't have all the facts of the case. Obviously, I don't have the court records. I didn't sit through the entire trial, but I didn't feel like 10 years after a murder occurred, you should be able to find someone guilty based on fingerprints on duct tape and no fingerprints anywhere else, and accuse a 13-year-old girl of having murdered a 63-year-old man. I just don't think it's possible. But the conviction came through. And I mean, I've gotten a lot of feedback from that episode, people who know these people, you know, and most people think that she's guilty, but I just I didn't feel like that they proved it. And I didn't feel like she had a great defense either.
That's
Okay.
typical. There's always a situation where your gut will tell you they absolutely did it, but could they prove in a court of law? And that's where it gets
I'm not even
messy.
really sure she did it, but considering that a jury found her guilty, you know, you have to go with that. You know what I mean? So that was my biggest question, was did they prove it, you know?
Yeah.
Well, our question is, I'd like each of you to say who you think the actual WM3 killer is. If
West
you know
Memphis
about the
3.
case, of course.
I'm going to go with the stepdad of one of the victims. There's so many names.
I can't remember his name.
Terry Hobbs.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Terry Hobbs.
That's him.
That's
This
my
is just
vote.
a guess.
No, I am not even guessing. I'm 100%.
I
Never dug into that case, but I was obsessed with it. Like, you know,
I know who it's not. Is that the
Uh,
question?
oh,
weirdly enough, Aaron shared a YouTube video with me a long time ago, and there was the bite mark impression on one of the victims. And when he initially sent me the video, I said, I don't believe in bite marks. I don't believe in that crap unless unless somebody has a crazy denture weird thing where they're missing half their teeth, I don't believe it. And somebody had taken Terry Hobbs' dentures and superimposed it on top of the bite mark, and it fit perfectly.
And you know, when Erica was talking about everything that's become junk science, I kept thinking of bite marks because I always think of how it played out in the Ted Bundy case. But but I'm just like, junk science, my butt.
Yeah.
Do you know there's freaks that get his bite mark tattooed? Sorry if this freaks.
Yeah, I saw that.
Beyond stuff for me.
But that
he did have a distinct like dental structure, and that's one of the reasons it was compelling.
And that was more compelling than most of the evidence, but I will actually say I don't know. I really don't know.
Which is just so scary. All these years, and there's just a murderer, you know, or murderers just walking around who could do that to children.
That's what worries me about the Delphi case, is you look at the WM3 case and they haven't solved that one. What about the Delphi murders?
Look what they have there, and they haven't even gotten close.
No.
It feels like they haven't gotten close. And I know I bring this up fairly often, even though we haven't covered it, because this is the one case, well, this is one of like two cases I read about all the time.
Yeah.
And at some point we might cover it, but I'm just hoping we get a little more information, because I feel like if we cover it now, it'll be mostly just Justin and I off the cuff, you know, conveying information and talking about it. And we typically like to give more information. I mean, we're not a documentary, but we like to bring the information we feel people should have on the case.
And I don't even have enough of an opinion about the Delphi case yet. I don't have any opinion about it yet because there's just not enough useful information.
Do you feel like they're not giving us more information because they don't have it? Or do you feel like they have a lot more than they're telling us? Or because I always feel like, you know, the little tidbits they've been giving us, I always feel like, I wonder if they think it's a cop or a retired cop or something just gives me that feel for some reason. But you just can never tell because you don't have any idea what they know. They act like they don't know anything, but then they closely guard it like they know something big.
Well, if they do, then, you know, I mean, they're trying not to compromise the trial, and I totally understand that. You have to hold it close to the vest, or you wind up, you know, in a situation of double jeopardy if shit goes sideways at trial. So I get that, but I mean, it's just going to be one of those cases that's within the public's fascination, and people just want to know. And until they make an arrest, they can't release anything.
It sucks because it's that fine line where you have to walk. You want the public's help, So you want to put out more information, but you can't put out more information because now everyone will have that information and you'll get a bunch of false leads and people saying they are the Delphi killer when they're not. And it just sucks.
It's tricky because you can closely guard information. You can wait to see if you get more information, but which way does it cut? You have Kyron Horman, that case unsolved. They could have moved on the person of interest. They haven't. And then we just covered Michelle Harris. Her husband, Cal, went to multiple trials. And it was a similar situation where they were kind of waiting. They didn't get more information, but they really felt in their gut he did it. So they just moved on it because they thought either he's going to get some time or he won't, but we need to try and get him because we think he did it. And in the Delphi case, maybe they get information, they have a suspect, but they don't have enough to hold them. And I don't know. I don't know where this is going.
I've got one. I just talked to Haley about helping me research, but I've got it coming up. And, they went so far as to indict him and then decided the evidence wasn't strong enough. And everybody firmly believes this man killed his wife. I mean, there's a lot of evidence to say he did. But, I mean, this is one of those, they even brought in Dr. Michael Bodden. Like that's one of those things about this case. And I mean, it's 20 years, I think now that this guy's been out and everybody knows he did it. And I'm even hesitant into doing it because he's still a doctor, a practicing doctor. He's got plenty of money to come sue me. But there's also enough stuff on the internet with other people saying he did it that I'm really scared about doing it. But yeah, I mean, I respect the fact that they dismiss the charges rather than risk losing. I hate it. I hate to put it that way, but that it is what it is.
Right, because if they lose, they can't, they might not be able to try him again if they ever do get anything.
Unless he's in the Army.
That's right.
They can draft him real quick so then they can press charges.
That really is the only thing in the Timothy Hennis case. Like, I don't find it morally objectionable because I believe in DNA.
But it's shady.
I understand from a scholarly standpoint and from a legal standpoint, people's argument, like, okay, sure, yeah, he did it. But this is beyond double jeopardy. This is shitty. They shouldn't have been able to do this. This is an overreach. Like, I get that argument.
Robin just wrote in and was asking if we'd seen Innocent Victims, which is about the Eastburn murders. And it has this happy ending, because he's acquitted and everything. That now, of course, knowing the DNA results, that is just, isn't it creepy?
That's the book I told you that I read, The Opposing. And he actually put out a different edition with an epilogue after he was convicted. So I actually got to read that edition and he still believed in him. I mean, it is kind of crazy. I didn't know there was a movie. I'm sure it was a great TV movie, as they always are.
It sounds like Robin really liked the movie, maybe. I don't know. Maybe you can let us know. But
look that up. I'm always about a good TV movie.
But now that we've talked about these horrible crimes, can you give us a little taste of anything that's coming up? Do you have any events coming up or episodes that you're very excited about that you'd like people to know about?
Who wants to go?
Either one.
Oh, I thought you were looking at Erica, so I wasn't really sure. I wish we had some events to go to.
Really, right now, because of the COVID, everything's canceled, at least until CrimeCon, and that's up in the air if we get a second wave. But yeah, I'm missing my friends, missing the meetups. There was a lot of stuff that got canceled, and that sucks.
That's the stuff that makes this job so much more fun.
Oh my God.
Is getting to do that stuff. So without it, it's like, deflated balloon.
Well, I enjoy meeting listeners and all that, but also you feel like you're best friends with people on the internet. Like, it's so lovely to see your face and to talk to you.
Right.
Because we have so much fun together in person, and so it sucks missing those events. But
yeah, it does. What are you going to cover next, Erica?
I am a female poisoner. They're always popular. It's kind of interesting. I got research on her, and then me, I'm always the nerd. I read another book, and evidently there was some sexual abuse in her background that might have kind of, it's appropriate, especially to talk to with you, at a formative age, and what kind of turned her into basically a psychopath. She murdered several people with arsenic. That's what's coming up. But yeah, I just hit my 100th, and that was a huge
amazing. Congrats.
Thank you. I was so stressed out because I chose a hate crime. It's definitely, those are always stressful. And I actually had to mention something Trump had done, which is always risky.
God.
I don't, and I say administration, but like I had to. It was breaking news, and I had to put off recording for a day to get it into the script because it mattered. I had to. So that sucks. But I mean, other than that, I'm actually really proud of how it came out, and people are responding to it really well. So that's good.
And which episode was that?
It's called Small Town Hate. Small Town Hate: The Murder of Billy Jack Gaither. It was out of Sylacauga, Alabama. He was a gay man. He was murdered in 1999, and they still do not have sexual orientation or anything like that on the state crime or the state hate crime statute. Interestingly, this was kind of my hook for the episode. It is now being passed through the Senate, but only because a bill went through the House of Representatives, passed 92-0, to add police officers under the protection of a hate crime, which is kind of crazy because it's already a capital crime in Alabama to kill a police officer. But a Republican representative put it on there. It got all the way to the Senate, and it was a Black female senator named Vivian Davis Figures that insisted on adding an amendment for sexual orientation. And they've been fighting for decades to get it on there, and there's finally a chance. And just the timing of that with everything that's going on in our country right now is incredible to me, because that only happened in February that he introduced the bill. So it's insane.
So there's hope yet. It's funny how progress gets made. Sometimes because there are things happening that don't look like progress. But if you have a clever politician, you got to give them
that
credit.
was beyond clever, because she's like, you want this through? We're putting it on there. And I love that. Like, I really, really hope that works, because they were all for adding the police. And, you can't be pro police and not pro everybody.
But we should be pro everybody anyway. I always say, if we're not protecting the most minority of us, nobody's got protection.
Exactly.
It's like a weak link. As soon as we start letting it unravel because so-and-so doesn't deserve it, well, someone can come along and decide you don't deserve it. We just need to cover everybody.
Yeah, I can agree more. We're all human beings. It doesn't matter about anything else. And you can't, obviously I agree. But the timing of it, and I actually caught an article, I almost didn't put it in the episode, that it kind of slipped under the cracks of what she did, and it's amazing.
Yeah, it used to be you had to be a majority to get your way, and now thankfully we're looking out and going, okay, this is just plain wrong. Mm-hmm. And thankfully, I think we want to complain about our cell phones and stuff, but I think being able to capture events on camera, it's making people look at something that they otherwise would have ignored. They don't have to read that article. They don't have to listen to an account of what happened. Now they're seeing it and they can't avoid it anymore. And so now they're forced to confront things. And I think that's a good.
I actually heard somebody say, we're still waiting on the body cam footage from George Floyd. And I'm like, why do we need it at this point? Everyone recorded it. Like,
it had 3 different vantage points at this point, right?
I know. I don't give a shit about the body cam footage anymore. I saw a man murdered on video. I think
part of that is going to be mitigating circumstances for the other cops, because supposedly one of them said, hey, check his pulse. Hey, and he was mentioning that it's some kind of phenomena of like getting overexcited and sudden death. I'm not entirely sure I believe in that bullshit, but evidently he mentioned this thing and mentioned checking his pulse. So it might be some mitigating circumstances for his accomplices. But other than that, no.
I don't know if I believe in that, because the best way to check the pulse is to first shove Derek Chauvin off of George Floyd,
right?
And then check the neck.
Able to get to one.
Me,
Could you imagine being a human being standing there and see that happen and not be able to do anything? God, it's horrific.
It's horrific.
I read one article, and don't take this as I'm defending any of them, please. But one article said that the other 2 officers that were holding him down were like the second day on the job.
Oh, God.
But not the second day on this planet.
No, you're right. And I'm just like, wow, just,
But they always say that, though. They always like, well, he's my superior. It's a chain of command. You got to get out of that damn mindset. Right.
It's about humanity at this point.
Yeah.
Oh, their excuses. We got a message in to us for Justin and I that was detailing all of the things that George Floyd had done in his life. Which I already had that information. Guess what? I don't care. It wasn't like he was actively shooting people at the
No,
time.
he was accused of having a bad $20 bill, and you're going to put him in cuffs and throw him on the ground? Like,
Well, they were
that's
bringing up his past, armed robbery and
Yeah, they're victim blaming. Like that means somehow he deserves to get murdered. Now, what, bad karma or something is
Right.
that?
I
that's
guess
what
what
Justin, he said that for years. For years.
I've been preaching, and seriously, even if somebody is guilty of murder, we don't kill them in the street.
no, you don't get to be the judge, jury, and executioner.
No.
What
No,
happened to our
you might get the
civilized
death
society,
penalty
right?
and sit on death row for 25 years, but we definitely don't kill you right then and there.
No.
Yeah, we just need a civilized society. And I also say we're not always going to get the justice we want, whether it's justice for George Floyd or justice for murder victims, because there are always going to be compromises, but we need to keep heading in the right direction.
Yeah.
I feel like we can always do that. And so despite a few nasty messages to us, most people are writing in and they're supporting us for our comments because we've commented before episodes. And then this week, Justin and I are releasing a Patreon episode that is just about Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. And it's all just us off the cuff talking about these incidents and why they're important for us to pay attention to them. These are crimes to begin with, so we feel like it's in our wheelhouse. But then people are always trying to victim blame. They're trying to say, oh, but this doesn't matter. This person doesn't matter. And we saw how Breonna Taylor is so far from justice right now. We saw Ahmaud Arbery, his killers weren't even going to be held accountable for anything.
That accidentally came out.
And then you have the police apologists. And again, I have met a lot of police officers I really like, but it's now time to start looking at everything because we can't let this continue anymore. So it's nothing against police. We just as a society need to do better.
I just want to say something real quick. You said accidentally came out, and I want to correct that slightly because the guy videoing actually thought this will justify the murder of Arbery, and I'm going to release the video, and it's like, oh my God.
Yeah, he's like, nobody's going to wonder why I turned the corner in my car recording, because that's not a normal thing to do.
No.
That's the first thing I thought was, why was he recording when he turned that corner?
Violation, first of all.
So weird. So many layers to those stories, all of them.
Literally, he thought it would justify the murder of somebody running down the street. And I'm like, wow. I thought we'd come much further than this, but apparently not.
No, I'll tell you where it went wrong, Justin, because we covered a case a while back, and it was the case of Trayvon Martin.
Yeah.
And it was that time when it was like, we decided that somehow if you meant well as a citizen to stop a criminal or a supposed criminal, that we gave you the benefit of the doubt, but we can't do that. And that's what we had said on the episode is this guy had no right to do what he did. So I don't care what the courts decided. I don't care what other people are writing into us with, which they have. He had no right to carry a gun and run after some kid and then end up killing him. It just didn't, it's not right. And it didn't make any sense, but we let that slide. And now we're seeing the results of that.
Aaron and I are both gun owners, so we give a gun owner point of view about self-defense, and we know castle law doctrine, stand your ground, all those things very well. And I swear to God, people would actually justify if I went and stood out in front of a bar to stop drunk drivers, picked a fight with them, and then as soon as I lose the fight, pull my gun and end it. People justify that. They're like, yeah, you'd be in the right. And I'm like, no, as soon as I go to the bar armed with a gun, I'm showing intent to murder somebody. And they don't get it. And I'm like, you can't go pick a fight.
Risk too. It's the risk. You're putting people at risk for no good reason.
Yeah.
It's because everyone always likes to say, everyone has a right to protect yourself. But that's when there's a threat. What about when there's no threat,
Yeah.
Or you're the threat.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, you have the right to defend yourself, but you don't have the right to go pick a fight. And then when you lose, use deadly force to end it.
Right.
It's stupid.
Yeah, someone had written in about Trayvon Martin and it said, you can hear in the background him screaming because there's audio captured. And I just don't like thinking about that. But again, I think that's where this all went wrong. We've somehow justified citizens who mean well. And that's what, in the Ahmaud Arbery case, that's what they're trying to pull off, which is, oh, well, we thought he was a criminal, so we were trying our best to stop him. But it's like, first of all, it's not your business. And
That's when you call 911.
You really
That's literally why 911 exists.
exactly.
And even Georgia law says that you can only do a citizen's arrest if there's an active felony crime being perpetrated. Active. Not, oh, there might have been something that was a minor crime that happened days ago. So even if you try to use the law to justify it, it doesn't pan out. And why those two guys were not charged immediately is just mind-boggling to me. But
is it, or is it?
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but I think this is we should have expected it. And it's a sad statement about our society and how far we haven't come yet, probably.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, Justin and I haven't talked about anything we have coming up, but I know for a while there, we got a number of messages, maybe, probably 6 to 8, about we're covering too many murders involving children. And I know Justin could probably attest to this, but there are times where I'll just say, I can't do anything like that. I don't want to cover anything like that. And it just so happened that this year, I have a bunch of them scheduled. So we have, I don't know if you, I mean, I guess they're technically kids, but we have another one coming up weeks from now or something. But yeah, it's funny how the audience will say it's a little too rough. But I mean, to me, all these cases are horrific when you stop and think about them. Even cases where no one dies. I mean, for any of you that's watching or listening, if you haven't read up on Christy Martin, who's actually Christy Salters, she was maybe the best female boxer of all time. And her husband, who was like 2 decades her senior and her trainer, he tried to kill her in 2010. And she somehow survived that attack. But you should definitely read up on what happened to her and about how she found love again in one of her former opponents. So it's kind of a really interesting story. I would definitely recommend checking it out. I know ESPN's written about it. They probably have the most comprehensive article on it. But Christy Martin, Christy Salters, look it up.
Oh, wow. That sounds interesting. Need a 30 on 30 on it. Is that what you call those? I've really enjoyed some of those. I've really enjoyed some of those. I thought their coverage of O.J. Simpson was fantastic.
That's such a hard case to cover too. There are so many, especially if you just talk about theories. I mean, that could
well, I mean, I'm sure you guys are like me. You lived it, and I was obsessed. I was in college, and I actually recorded the trial on my VCR. I'm really showing my age, but yeah, I was obsessed. So that's one of those for me that, like, I've read books by defense and prosecutors. Like, I really have looked at it from every viewpoint and think I know what I know. But that they got new stuff. It was great.
I always am timid about covering Stephen Avery, O.J. Simpson, Adnan, just because so many people are obsessed with it, that no matter how you cover it, it's never going to be good enough. And they're always going to nitpick what you said, what you didn't say, and how you said it. So,
and it'll be so long because there's just so many details to those cases. It gets hard to do that.
I did it on a crossover episode with another podcast called Trashy Divorces. And so they basically covered O.J. Simpson's divorces, and then I covered the murders. But man, the amount of trolling and hate and messages I got, I don't regret it. I said what I said. I meant every word of it, but wow. Yeah, it felt differently about hot button cases like that for sure.
I, for one, don't think that there's a killer roaming about out free. Well, there definitely is one, but not a different one than the one that we think it already is.
Yeah, your remark would have worked some years ago.
No hate mail, please.
Oh, man. Well, Justin, any other comments you want to make? We kind of got a little hot and heavy there, like serious subject matter toward the end, but it's the times that we're living in.
Sorry I turned it that way, but I tend to do that. So I really don't. I mean, people have asked what we think of Adnan and Avery and stuff, and I'm just I want to go on another podcast and talk about my real thoughts about Stephen Avery, but I can't do it in 15 seconds because people will take me out of context. I have to really flesh out my my thoughts and my feelings on that one. So yeah.
Yeah, it's rough. It's hard. And it's like you look at Stephen Avery one way, you look at Brendan Dassey another way. It's like
Exactly.
two separate cases, you know.
You do.
Totally agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be easy to do that. Well, I want to thank you both for coming on. It was great to see you. And normally we'd see you at CrimeCon, and who knows, maybe in October we'll get to see you again.
Fingers crossed.
Hoping
Fingers
so.
crossed.
We're good.
Glad
All right.
everyone's doing well.
Yeah.
And shout out to some people in the chat. You know, there's so many here. Bat, Twyla, Murderous, Jamie, of course.
And Rebecca.
Rebecca
Booze.
from Dialogue.
Yeah.
And Robin Warder, lest we forget, right?
Oh,
Yes.
Robin.
The nicest
All right.
guy in podcasting.
The nicest guy in podcasting, who I chatted with for, I don't know, I think an hour and a half over pizza in Toronto. Was it pizza? I think. I don't know.
What did you guys talk about? Unsolved mysteries?
Yes, we talked about unsolved mysteries, but we also talked about baseball because that seems to be something he's into. So, yes. But and by the way, if you haven't been to Toronto, it's pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
But
Maybe
I want to
one
thank
day.
everyone in chat, everyone for hi Twyla, everyone for showing up and listening to us discuss some cases. And if you haven't checked out Murderous Minors or Southern Fried True Crime for some reason, check them out.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
That was fun. So good
Thanks
to see
everyone for the support.
Make sure you end the stream, Aaron.